Husband Nathan Brooks looked directly at his overweight wife before a ballroom filled with investors, reporters, and city officials, then calmly told security she did not belong beside him. Moments later, he welcomed another woman onto the stage with a practiced smile, believing image mattered more than loyalty. The applause that followed sounded like victory, but the narrator already knew something no one else in that room did. The million-dollar project Nathan celebrated so proudly existed only because a silent sponsor had chosen to believe in him long before he stopped believing in his own wife. Before the night ended, power would begin moving in a direction he never imagined. If you believe respect should never depend on appearance, share where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. Subscribe if you'd like to stay for more stories where patience, truth, and justice quietly find their way to the light. Emily Carter had long ago discovered that the world often made decisions before she ever spoke a single word. People noticed her weight before they noticed her kindness. They noticed her loose sweaters before they noticed the notebooks she always carried. They noticed the quiet way she stood near the back of every room, never demanding attention, never competing to be heard. Few people stayed long enough to realize that she remembered every conversation, every promise, every contradiction. The narrator knew something almost no one around Emily understood. Silence was never weakness, it was preparation. On an unusually cool Monday morning in Seattle, Emily stood in the kitchen of the townhouse she had shared with her husband for nearly 12 years. Rain tapped softly against the windows while coffee steamed from a simple ceramic mug. Across the room, Nathan Brooks adjusted the cuffs of an expensive navy suit in front of the hallway mirror without looking toward his wife. His mornings had become increasingly predictable. The tailored suits, the luxury watch, the constant checking of business messages, the impatient sigh whenever Emily entered the room. "You don't have to wait up tonight," Nathan said while reading an email on his phone. Emily simply nodded. "I probably won't be home until after midnight." Another quiet nod. Nathan slipped his phone into his pocket. "The investors want another dinner." Emily answered with the same gentle voice she always used. "I hope everything goes well." "It will." His reply sounded more like confidence than gratitude. After the front door closed behind him, the house became peaceful again. Emily stood still for several seconds. Not because she felt abandoned, because she had learned that moments of silence allowed thoughts to become clearer than emotions. She washed her coffee cup, wiped the kitchen counter, and carried a black leather notebook into the small study overlooking the backyard. The notebook looked ordinary. Inside, every page told another story. Dates, meetings, comments Nathan had made, names of people he introduced, trips that had suddenly appeared on his calendar. Emily never wrote opinions, only facts. The habit had begun years earlier after volunteering for several nonprofit organizations, where accurate documentation often mattered more than passionate arguments. Facts survived. Memories changed. She wrote today's date. Nathan, investor dinner. Expected home after midnight. Nothing more. She closed the notebook and opened her laptop. Unlike the quiet life everyone assumed she lived, her mornings rarely ended with household chores. Encrypted emails waited inside a secure communication system unavailable to the general public. Each message concerned philanthropic investments across several states, affordable housing, medical research, community education, emergency disaster relief. Every proposal followed the same strict process: independent review, financial audits, risk assessments, ethics approval. Only after multiple committees reached the same conclusion would funding ever be approved. Emily read each report carefully. She never allowed personal feelings to influence decisions. That principle had become especially important several months earlier. One proposal among hundreds had carried a familiar company name: Brooks Urban Development, Nathan's company. She had immediately declared a conflict of personal interest. Another review committee evaluated the project independently. Only after every legal safeguard had been satisfied did the proposal receive approval. Emily had signed the final authorization, not as Nathan's wife, but as the authorized representative responsible for ensuring that every procedural requirement had been followed. No favoritism, no shortcuts, no exceptions. No one outside a very small circle knew she held that responsibility. Nathan certainly did not. He believed the funding had arrived because his presentation had impressed investors. Emily had never corrected him. Recognition had never interested her. Responsibility had. A notification appeared on her screen. Quarterly progress reports had arrived from all funded projects, including Nathan's. Emily downloaded every document into carefully organized folders before opening the construction report. Budget allocation, timeline updates, engineering inspections, community partnerships, everything appeared complete at first glance. Yet something unsettled her. She had developed an instinct after years of reviewing financial reports. Sometimes numbers looked correct. Patterns did not. One consulting expense had doubled without explanation. A marketing budget had expanded beyond the approved limit. Travel reimbursements appeared unusually frequent. None of these items proved wrongdoing. Not yet. Emily highlighted each page and added small notes in the margin. Review supporting invoices. Request clarification. Compare next quarter. She closed the report without reaching conclusions. Evidence always came before assumptions. Outside, the afternoon rain became heavier. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her older sister, Hannah. "How are you today?" Emily smiled faintly before replying. "I'm fine, busy with paperwork. You still working too hard?" "Maybe. Dinner this weekend, I'd like that." Hannah had never treated Emily as someone defined by appearance. Growing up, she had defended her younger sister countless times from careless jokes and cruel remarks. Even after both women built separate lives, that quiet protection never disappeared. Emily appreciated it more than she ever expressed. Late that afternoon, Nathan returned home unexpectedly. He walked through the front door, speaking loudly on a wireless headset. "No Move Thursday's presentation." He paused. "I said move it." Emily waited until his call ended before asking softly, "You're home early?" "Only for a few files." He hurried upstairs. Minutes later, he returned carrying several folders. His phone rang again. This time, his expression immediately changed. His voice became warmer, almost playful. "I'll see you tonight." Emily heard a woman's laughter through the speaker before the call disconnected. Nathan slipped the phone into his pocket. "I have another meeting." Emily nodded once. "Drive safely." Nathan looked briefly surprised. Perhaps he expected questions, accusations, suspicion. Instead, there was only calm. He left again. Emily remained standing near the staircase for several moments, not because she doubted what she had heard, because certainty required patience. She opened another notebook. Today's second departure. Female caller, evening meeting. No assumptions, only observations. The narrator already understood something Nathan never considered. Emily's greatest strength was not forgiveness, nor endurance. It was discipline. She refused to build conclusions from emotions alone. Every important decision in her life rested upon documented truth. Across town, Nathan entered a modern downtown restaurant where Vanessa Collins already waited beside the window, young, polished, and effortlessly confident. Vanessa had become the public relations director responsible for shaping Nathan's rapidly growing reputation. She understood headlines, She understood appearances. Most importantly, she understood Nathan's growing desire to be admired. "You look exhausted," Vanessa said with an easy smile. Nathan laughed. "Success doesn't leave much time for sleep. It also doesn't leave room for distractions." She did not say Emily's name. She did not need to. Nathan understood perfectly. Meanwhile, several miles away, Emily reviewed another email. The Independent Oversight Committee requested routine clarification regarding several construction expenses connected to Brooks' urban development. Routine, nothing alarming. Yet, Emily quietly opened a fresh folder labeled simply Quarterly Review. Inside it, she placed every report, every invoice, every email, every financial summary. Then, she locked the folder within the encrypted archive. Not because she expected disaster, because careful records protected honest people as much as they exposed dishonest ones. As evening settled over Seattle, city lights reflected across rain-soaked streets. Nathan believed he was building the future through ambition. Vanessa believed she was helping create the perfect public image. Almost everyone around them believed success belonged entirely to Nathan Brooks. Only the narrator knew another truth had been growing quietly beneath the surface. The woman dismissed because of her appearance was also the one person who understood every document supporting the million-dollar project. And while Nathan spent his evenings chasing admiration, Emily continued doing what she always had. Watching, recording, and allowing facts, not anger, to determine what would happen next. Seattle's business community admired people who looked successful long before it verified whether they truly deserved admiration. Nathan Brooks understood that culture better than most. He had once measured success by completed buildings, satisfied clients, and employees who trusted him. Somewhere along the way, however, those measurements had quietly changed. Success became magazine interviews, social media engagement invitations to exclusive charity galas, and photographs taken beneath expensive chandeliers. He no longer asked whether people respected his character. He only wondered whether they envied his image. The narrator already knew how dangerous that change would become. Because reputations built upon appearances usually demanded constant maintenance. Truth never did. On Tuesday morning, Nathan arrived at the headquarters of Brooks Urban Development nearly an hour before everyone else. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Seattle, while the first sunlight reflected across glass towers and construction cranes. The office itself had recently been renovated with polished stone floors, imported furniture, and oversized photographs, celebrating the company's largest projects. Every detail had been carefully chosen. Not because clients requested luxury, because luxury impressed investors. Nathan walked directly into the executive conference room where Vanessa Collins was already arranging presentation materials. She wore a tailored cream-colored suit, her tablet open beside a stack of promotional brochures. "You've got 3 interviews today," she said without looking up. Nathan loosened his tie. "And tomorrow?" The mayor's office confirmed lunch. He smiled. "Excellent." Vanessa handed him a printed schedule. "The foundation ceremony next month is attracting more press than we expected." Nathan studied the page. "Good. We'll need to manage appearances carefully." Nathan nodded almost automatically. Vanessa hesitated before speaking again. "I noticed your wife accepted the invitation." Nathan looked up. "I'll handle that. The photographs need consistency." "I know." Vanessa lowered her voice. "People connect emotionally with successful stories. Investors expect a certain image." Nathan folded the schedule. "They'll get one." The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet those few sentences revealed far more than either of them realized. Neither discussed engineering, neither discussed community housing, neither discussed families who would eventually benefit from the project. Everything centered upon perception. Across the city, Emily Carter sat inside a quiet conference room, several floors above a nonprofit financial services office. Unlike Nathan's headquarters, nothing about this building suggested luxury. The furniture was practical. The walls displayed photographs of completed community projects rather than executive portraits. Emily preferred it that way. Around the polished wooden table sat 6 committee members reviewing quarterly philanthropic investments across multiple states. Each proposal received identical treatment regardless of the organization requesting funds. Facts first. Personal relationships, never. Margaret Ellis, the committee chairwoman, adjusted her reading glasses. Our next item concerns Brooks Urban Development. Emily remained silent. Margaret glanced toward us. Her. For the record, Emily answered calmly, I continue to disclose my marital relationship with the company's CEO. I will participate only regarding procedural compliance. Every person around the table nodded. The declaration had become routine. Transparency protected everyone involved. Another committee member summarized the latest progress reports. Construction remains generally on schedule. Emily listened carefully. The financial review identified several expenses requiring clarification. No one reacted dramatically. Clarification requests occurred regularly. Responsible oversight required questions, not accusations. Margaret looked around the room. We'll request supporting documentation before the next review. Emily simply wrote one sentence inside her notebook. Await documentation. Nothing else. No conclusions. No emotion. After the meeting concluded, Margaret walked beside Emily toward the elevator. You've always handled this professionally. Emily smiled politely. It's important. It can't be easy. Emily considered the question. It's easier when everyone follows the same rules. Margaret nodded with quiet respect. Very few people knew Emily's full responsibilities inside the philanthropic organization. Officially, she served as Executive Director of Strategic Grant Administration. In practice, she supervised the legal compliance process governing hundreds of millions of dollars in charitable investments each year. She had earned that position over nearly 15 years. Not through family connections, not through publicity, through precision, through patience, through an almost relentless commitment to documentation. Meanwhile, Nathan believed Emily worked as a mid-level administrative consultant for a nonprofit. She had never corrected that assumption. He had never asked enough questions to discover otherwise. That evening, Nathan attended another networking reception inside an upscale waterfront hotel. Crystal lights shimmered above crowded banquet tables, while local business leaders exchanged business cards and practiced polished conversations. Vanessa remained close beside him throughout the evening. Whenever photographers appeared, she instinctively positioned herself near Nathan. Whenever investors approached, she smoothly introduced him before steering conversations toward future opportunities. You've become the face of responsible development, one investor remarked. Nathan accepted the compliment easily. We're trying to build something meaningful. Vanessa smiled. And Nathan personally oversees every major decision. Nathan appreciated how naturally she elevated his reputation. Across the ballroom, another executive quietly asked, Your wife couldn't make it? Nathan barely hesitated. She prefers staying out of public events. The answer sounded harmless. Incomplete truths often did. Back home, Emily prepared a simple dinner before settling into the small study once again. Her laptop displayed several pending emails. Most concerned ordinary administrative matters. One message, however, immediately caught her attention. Subject, supporting documentation delay. The accounting department responsible for reviewing Brooks' urban development reported that requested invoices had not yet arrived, despite repeated reminders. Emily read the message twice. Delayed paperwork happened. Construction projects generated enormous amounts of documentation. Still, she highlighted the email and moved it into the quarterly review folder. Another note appeared inside her notebook. Invoices pending? Follow normal schedule. She closed the notebook. Outside darkness settled over the neighborhood. Nathan returned shortly before 11. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and restaurant wine. Emily looked up from the book she had been reading. Long evening. Very. Was the event successful? Nathan smiled. We've got people talking. Emily nodded. That's good. Nathan seemed almost disappointed by her calmness. He stood beside the fireplace. You never ask who I meet. Emily closed her book. If you want to tell me, I listen. And if I don't, that's your decision. Nathan studied her expression. There was no jealousy, no argument, no visible resentment, only quiet attention. He turned away first. I'm going upstairs. Emily waited until she heard the bedroom door close. Then she returned to her notebook. Networking reception returned 10:52 p.m. No additional observations. She placed the notebook beside the others, already filling the lower drawer of her desk. There were dozens. Not because Emily expected conflict, because organized records had become second nature. Several days later, the Oversight Committee received another package. This time, it contained updated financial summaries from Brooks' urban development. Emily reviewed every page carefully. Most expenses aligned perfectly. A few did not. One consulting contract had increased again. Marketing expenditures continued rising despite no approved amendment. Travel costs appeared spread across several departments rather than reported together. Individually, each discrepancy seemed minor. Collectively, they formed a pattern. Patterns deserved attention, not conclusions. Emily opened a spreadsheet and entered every questionable transaction into separate categories. Date, amount, department. Supporting document received yes, no, pending. The process took nearly 3 hours. When she finished, she closed the file without drawing any judgment. The narrator, however, understood what Emily herself refused to assume prematurely. Every careful note, every preserved email, every delayed invoice, every unexplained payment, each was becoming another quiet thread in a much larger picture. Nathan still believed the greatest threat to his future was maintaining the perfect public image. He spent increasing amounts of time standing beneath bright lights, smiling for cameras and accepting praise. Emily spent her evenings beneath a small desk lamp, organizing facts no one else considered important. One chased admiration. The other protected truth. Neither realized how soon those two paths would collide before people who valued evidence far more than appearances. By early spring, Brooks' urban development had become one of the fastest-growing construction firms in the Pacific Northwest. Business magazines praised Nathan Brooks as a visionary entrepreneur who balanced commercial success with community responsibility. Local television stations replayed footage of construction crews breaking ground for affordable housing developments, while newspaper editorials described the $1 Million Initiative as a model for future public-private partnerships. Nathan enjoyed every headline, every interview, every invitation. The narrator already understood something those glowing articles could not. Awards often celebrated appearances long before accountability arrived. On Wednesday morning, Nathan stood before nearly 200 employees gathered inside the company's renovated atrium. Large banners displaying architectural renderings hung from the walls. Coffee stations lined one side of the room. A professional photographer moved quietly through the crowd, capturing candid moments of smiling executives shaking hands with construction managers. Nathan stepped onto the temporary stage. "I want to thank every one of you," he began confidently. "This company started with a small office, a handful of people, and a belief that hard work changes communities." Applause echoed through the building. "Our newest housing initiative proves that vision matters." More applause followed. Nathan continued speaking for nearly 20 minutes, crediting dedicated employees, supportive investors, and strategic partnerships. He thanked city officials, engineering teams, marketing staff, consultants, even outside contractors. There was only one person he never mentioned: Emily. Not because she expected public recognition, because Nathan had slowly erased her from the story of his own success. After the gathering ended, Vanessa Collins joined Nathan near the refreshments table. "The speech was excellent," she said. "You think so?" It sounded authentic. Nathan smiled. "The cameras certainly liked it." Vanessa lowered her voice. "The local news station wants an exclusive interview next week." "Perfect." "They're also asking whether your wife will participate." Nathan's smile faded slightly. "I'll decline. They're interested in the personal side of your story. My business is the project." Vanessa nodded. "I'll tell them your family prefers privacy." Nathan appreciated how easily she handled uncomfortable questions. She understood exactly which details strengthened his image and which ones complicated it. Neither of them noticed one of the junior accountants quietly passing nearby, with several financial folders tucked beneath his arm. Across Seattle, Emily sat inside the Grant Oversight Division, reviewing another series of quarterly updates. A secure conference call connected committee members from offices across 3 different states. Financial analysts summarized dozens of ongoing projects. Most required little discussion. Some exceeded expectations. Others requested revised timelines. Finally, Brooks Urban Development appeared on the agenda. Margaret Ellis spoke first. The engineering inspections remained satisfactory. Another analyst continued. Community engagement targets are also progressing. Emily listened carefully without interrupting. Then came the financial review. Several supporting invoices remain outstanding despite previous requests. A brief silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence, simply professional consideration. Margaret looked toward the financial auditor. "Any concerns?" "Nothing conclusive." "Recommendation?" "We continue requesting documentation under standard compliance procedures." Emily quietly wrote another note. "Second request issued. Documentation incomplete. Maintain review schedule." She neither defended Nathan nor criticized him. The rules existed precisely to prevent personal relationships from influencing oversight. After the meeting concluded, Emily returned to her office. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Her workspace reflected her personality. Simple furniture, organized files, no expensive decorations. A small framed photograph of her late parents rested beside a modest potted fern. Her father had often repeated the same sentence throughout her childhood: "If your records are honest, you never need to raise your voice." Emily had carried those words into adulthood. She opened the Brooks Urban Development file once more. Each invoice was matched against approved budget categories. Most aligned perfectly. Then she reached another consulting payment. The amount itself wasn't extraordinary. The description was Strategic Brand Enhancement Services. Emily checked the original grant agreement. Marketing expenses had been approved only within specific limits designed to educate future residents about affordable housing opportunities. Brand enhancement wasn't prohibited, but it required additional authorization once costs exceeded a predetermined threshold. She searched the approval database. Nothing. No amendment. No revised authorization. Again, this proved nothing. Administrative delays occurred. Paperwork occasionally crossed departments. Emily highlighted the entry. Pending clarification. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, Nathan met Vanessa inside her office overlooking downtown. Presentation boards covered one wall. Upcoming media appearances filled another. Vanessa handed him a folder. I've scheduled interviews through the end of the month. Nathan skimmed the pages. This is more than I expected. Success creates demand. She hesitated before continuing. There's something else. Nathan looked up. The gala committee wants spouses included. Nathan sighed quietly. I'll think about it. Vanessa folded her hands. Nathan, I know. The photographs matter. Nathan leaned back. You really believe Emily hurts the company's image? Vanessa answered carefully. I believe people invest emotionally. Meaning, they like aspirational stories. Nathan stared silently toward the window. He remembered Emily years earlier. They had rented a tiny apartment, shared second-hand furniture, counted every dollar. She had encouraged him through failed contracts, unpaid invoices, and nights when he seriously considered closing the business forever. Back then, appearances hadn't mattered. Survival had. He pushed the memory aside. Let's discuss something else. Vanessa recognized the conversation had ended. That evening, Emily stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before driving home. An elderly cashier greeted her warmly. Good to see you again. You too. You always buy the healthiest vegetables. Emily laughed softly. I try. Simple conversations like these reminded her how ordinary life truly was. No one here cared about corporate rankings. No one recognized grant administrators. No one judged value through magazine covers. Back home, she prepared soup while classical music played quietly from a small speaker. Halfway through dinner, her secure work phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed Internal Audit Liaison. Emily answered immediately. This is Emily. Sorry to interrupt your evening. No problem. We received another submission from Brooks Urban Development. The missing invoices. Some of them. Emily waited. There are still several supporting documents absent. Were explanations included? No. Emily thanked the caller before ending the conversation. She walked into her study carrying a bowl of untouched soup. Opening her encrypted archive, she compared the newly submitted records with previous reports. Most questions had finally been answered. Several remained. One consulting company appeared repeatedly across different budget categories. Another reimbursement lacked accompanying travel documentation. Nothing individually alarming. Yet the pattern continued expanding. Emily opened a fresh spreadsheet. Instead of focusing upon dollar amounts alone, she mapped relationships, vendor names, approval dates, departments requesting payment, repeated authorizations. By midnight, several connections had emerged. Interesting, not incriminating. Interesting. She saved the document. Across town, Nathan finished another dinner with city officials. As everyone prepared to leave, one council member congratulated him. I heard the foundation is extremely pleased. Nathan smiled confidently. They should be. You've earned their trust. Nathan accepted the compliment without hesitation. He believed every word. The narrator understood something different. Trust had indeed been earned. just not in the way Nathan imagined. It existed because professionals like Emily insisted every grant follow strict procedures, every payment leave a paper trail, and every organization remain accountable, regardless of status. Nathan believed funding reflected personal admiration. Emily knew it reflected institutional discipline. Several days later, another package arrived at the oversight office. This one contained revised budget forecasts. Emily reviewed the projections line by line. Near the bottom of one appendix, she noticed an unusual adjustment. Marketing expenditures were projected to increase significantly during the next quarter. Yet no amendment request accompanied the forecast. She leaned back thoughtfully. Still no conclusions. Still no accusations. Only another question waiting for an answer. She placed the updated documents inside the growing quarterly review folder. The folder had become noticeably thicker than those belonging to other projects, not because Brooks' urban development had failed, because unanswered questions required careful preservation. Outside her office window, clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. Somewhere else in the city, Nathan accepted another interview, another photograph, another compliment celebrating his remarkable leadership. Meanwhile, Emily quietly organized invoices, emails, financial summaries, and committee correspondence into perfectly labeled files. Neither realized that the distance between admiration and accountability was shrinking with every document added to that growing archive. And long before anyone stood beneath bright stage lights at the public celebration, Nathan anticipated so eagerly the evidence was already beginning to write a story that cameras could never capture. Fan 6. The morning after the ceremony, the headlines looked exactly the way Nathan Brooks had hoped. Local business websites praised the successful launch of the Affordable Housing Initiative. Photographs captured him standing beside city officials, investors, and community leaders beneath bright stage lights. One image appeared repeatedly across multiple publications. Nathan smiling confidently, Vanessa Collins standing proudly at his side. The caption described her as the communications executive who had helped shape the project's public message. Emily Carter did not appear in a single published photograph. As far as the public knew, she had never attended the event. The narrator understood that absence could be misleading. Some of the most important people in any room were rarely the ones standing closest to the cameras. Emily woke before sunrise, as she always did. She brewed coffee, opened the kitchen curtains, and watched soft rain settle across the backyard. Nothing about her routine suggested that the previous afternoon had altered her life. She did not replay Nathan's words in her mind. She did not search social media. She did not read the news coverage. Instead, she opened her notebook. Under yesterday's final entry, she wrote only one additional sentence: maintain professional separation. She closed the notebook and quietly left for work. By 8:30, the Grant Oversight Division had already begun another busy day. Staff members moved between conference rooms, carrying financial reports, legal correspondence, and grant compliance files. Emily greeted colleagues with the same calm smile she offered every morning. No one could have guessed she had been publicly dismissed by her own husband less than 24 hours earlier. Margaret Ellis knocked gently on Emily's office door. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course." Margaret stepped inside carrying a thin folder. "I wanted to ask whether you're all right." Emily answered honestly. "I'm disappointed." Margaret nodded. "So am I." Neither woman mentioned Nathan directly. Neither needed to. After a brief silence, Margaret placed the folder on Emily's desk. "The Oversight Committee will begin routine secondary reviews on several active grants next week." Emily glanced at the cover. Brooks' Urban Development appeared among the listed organizations. "The timing is based on the annual schedule?" Emily asked. "Yes." "No changes because of yesterday?" "None." Emily seemed quietly relieved. Good. Margaret understood why. Emily had spent years ensuring that every organization, large or small, followed identical procedures. Changing the schedule because of personal events would undermine the very principles she believed in. We'll follow normal policy, Margaret said. Emily smiled faintly. That's exactly what we should do. Later that morning, the committee assembled inside the primary conference room. Stacks of financial summaries covered the long oak table. A compliance attorney joined the meeting remotely through a secure video connection. Margaret opened the session. Our purpose today is procedural. Everyone nodded. No one appeared emotional. No one discussed the ceremony. The first several projects required only routine approvals. Then Brooks Urban Development appeared on the screen. A senior financial analyst cleared his throat. We've completed preliminary comparisons between approved budgets and reported expenditures. He clicked to the next slide. Most categories remain within acceptable limits. Another slide appeared. However, several documentation requests remain unresolved. Emily quietly took notes. The analyst continued. Repeated consulting payments have been submitted using different internal cost codes. A committee member asked, improper, not necessarily. Concerning. Unclear. The compliance attorney spoke from the monitor. Recommendation. The analyst answered immediately. Request complete supporting documentation before releasing the next funding installment. Emily finally spoke. I agree. The room turned toward her. She continued calmly. The recommendation follows established policy. We should apply the same standard used for every other recipient. No one objected. Margaret wrote the decision into the official record. Secondary documentation required before next disbursement. Motion approved unanimously. The meeting moved on. No accusations, no dramatic confrontations. Simply procedure. Exactly as Emily believed justice should begin. Across town, Nathan sat inside his executive office, reviewing congratulatory emails. One message came from the mayor's office. Another from a national construction association. Several potential investors requested future meetings. Vanessa entered carrying another folder. The media response has been outstanding. Nathan smiled. I expected good coverage. You exceeded expectations. She handed him several printed articles. Nathan skimmed the headlines with obvious satisfaction. Then Vanessa hesitated. There is one email you should probably read. She placed another document on his desk. The sender was the Grant Oversight Division. Nathan opened it casually. Subject request for additional financial documentation. His smile faded slightly. He read the message again. They're asking for more invoices. Vanessa leaned forward. Is that unusual? Nathan shrugged. Not really. They've requested them before. Sometimes foundations ask for clarification. Vanessa relaxed. So, nothing serious? No. Nathan closed the email. They're just thorough. He believed his own explanation. After all, Emily had always described nonprofit organizations as careful and methodical. He never imagined just how methodical they truly were. Meanwhile, Emily spent most of the afternoon reviewing archived correspondence. She compared current reimbursement requests with the original grant agreement signed months earlier. Every approved amendment, every committee vote, every legal memorandum, every email authorizing changes. She worked slowly. Accuracy mattered more than speed. By late afternoon, she noticed another unusual detail. Several consulting invoices referenced strategic communication planning. Yet supporting reports describing completed work remained missing. Again, this alone proved nothing. Perhaps they had simply been filed elsewhere. Emily sent a brief internal message. Please request deliverables associated with consulting invoices dated March 12th, March 27th, and April 8th. Thank you. Nothing accusatory, only factual. Minutes later, she received confirmation. Request submitted. She added another note inside the growing compliance file. Documentation pending. Across the office, a younger analyst named Daniel approached her desk. Emily. Yes. I've always wondered something. She looked up. Why do you personally review so many files instead of delegating everything? Emily smiled. My father used to tell me something. What was that? If your signature appears on the final page, your eyes should reach every page before it. Daniel laughed softly. That sounds exhausting. Sometimes. Worth it. Emily looked toward the stacks of organized files. Always. Daniel thanked her and returned to his office. He never realized those simple words explained almost every decision Emily had made throughout her career. That evening, Nathan attended another dinner with several investors. Conversation flowed easily. Champagne glasses clinked. One executive leaned toward Nathan. I saw the ceremony yesterday. Nathan smiled. It went well. It certainly looked impressive. Another guest added, Your communications director is remarkable. Nathan glanced briefly toward Vanessa. She does excellent work. The conversation drifted toward future developments. No one mentioned Emily. No one asked about the woman quietly escorted away before the photographs began. For Nathan, that silence felt like confirmation that he had made the correct decision. Image had been protected. Reputation remained intact. Across the city, Emily sat alone in her study, reviewing another encrypted email. The internal audit unit had responded. Several requested consulting reports could not yet be located. Emily leaned back thoughtfully. Still no assumptions. She opened a fresh page inside her notebook. Missing supporting reports. Second request, outstanding. Continue standard review. She closed the notebook and looked through the rain-covered window. She wasn't thinking about Nathan. She was thinking about systems. Good systems protected honest organizations. Weak systems rewarded carelessness. If documentation eventually arrived and everything matched approved procedures, the review would end quietly. If it didn't, the rules would determine what happened next. Not emotions, not embarrassment, not marriage. The narrator understood something Emily herself refused to consider before evidence demanded it. Each unanswered request made the next question more important. Each delayed document narrowed the space for innocent explanations. Far below her office, in another part of the city, accountants at Brooks Urban Development searched filing cabinets for records requested by the foundation. Some invoices appeared quickly. Others required phone calls. Several employees quietly admitted they weren't entirely sure where certain consulting reports had been stored. One junior accountant frowned as he reviewed expense summaries. Didn't we already submit these? His supervisor answered without looking up. Just find whatever they're asking for. Neither recognized that routine confusion inside their accounting department had begun creating a timeline. A timeline built from emails, submission dates, missing attachments, approval signatures. Exactly the kind of timeline professionals like Emily trusted more than anyone's memory. As midnight approached, she placed every newly received document into the encrypted quarterly review folder. The folder had grown noticeably thicker since the project began. Not because she wanted it to, because careful oversight required patience. And patience, unlike anger, had a remarkable habit of uncovering truths that hurried people often overlooked. The requests for additional documentation should have been routine. For organizations that maintained orderly financial records, compliance reviews rarely lasted more than a few days. Supporting invoices were submitted, internal approvals were verified, questions were answered, funding continued without interruption. Brooks Urban Development did not follow that pattern. Not because anyone had proven intentional misconduct, but because every answer seemed to produce two new questions. The narrator already understood that complicated stories often revealed themselves one missing document at a time. Monday morning began with unexpected tension inside Brooks Urban Development's accounting department. Cardboard archive boxes covered several conference tables. Accounting staff searched through folders dating back nearly 6 months. Laptops remained open beside stacks of expense reports. Phones rang constantly. Nathan entered the accounting office with visible impatience. "What's taking so long?" Chief Financial Officer Richard Lawson looked up from a spreadsheet. The foundation requested additional supporting documents. "I know that. We're organizing everything." Nathan glanced across the crowded room. "It shouldn't be this difficult." Richard hesitated. Some consulting records were filed separately. Then combine them. "We're trying." Nathan folded his arms. "When do they need everything?" "By Wednesday." Nathan looked annoyed. "I don't want delays." "So do we." Neither man realized that the growing confusion itself had already become meaningful. Well-managed organizations rarely struggled to locate documents they claimed already existed. Across town, Emily reviewed the latest submissions arriving through the secure compliance portal. Several requested invoices had finally appeared. Others had not. She opened each file carefully. Invoice numbers, vendor names, approval signatures, purchase descriptions. Everything received the same attention. Her phone rang softly. It was Daniel from Internal Audit. "We've received another batch." "Anything unusual?" "There are inconsistencies." Emily remained quiet. "What kind?" "The same consulting company appears under multiple service descriptions." Emily wrote one sentence. "Explain coding differences." "I'll review everything this afternoon." "No conclusions yet," Daniel added. "Of course not." That answer reflected exactly why Daniel respected working with Emily. She never hurried toward accusations. Facts deserved patience. By lunchtime, Emily had converted dozens of financial records into a comparison chart. Every consulting payment appeared beside the original grant authorization. Green highlighted approved expenses. Yellow marked items awaiting clarification. Nothing appeared in red. Not yet. Her office remained silent, except for the occasional tapping of computer keys. Outside her door, co-workers laughed over lunch. Inside, Emily continued comparing numbers line by line. At 2:15, another secure email arrived. Subject: recovered internal correspondence. Emily opened the message. The Foundation's technology department had located archived emails attached to one of the delayed reimbursement requests. Normally, archived correspondence simply confirmed administrative details. This chain was different. The first email discussed marketing strategy. The second referenced moving expenses between budget categories. The third included a short reply from Vanessa Collins. "Move the communication costs through consulting. It will attract less attention during public reporting." Emily read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Standing alone, the email proved very little. Vanessa worked in public relations. She might simply have meant simplifying accounting categories before preparing reports. Context mattered. Emily immediately searched for the complete conversation. Missing. Only fragments had been recovered. She opened her notebook. Recovered email fragment. Incomplete context. Request full archive. No assumptions. She closed the notebook. Several floors below the Information Technology Department began restoring additional archive data requested during routine compliance support. No one considered the request unusual. Digital recovery occurred regularly whenever attachments disappeared or email servers changed. Meanwhile, Nathan met Vanessa inside the executive boardroom. She noticed his expression immediately. "You look stressed. The foundation keeps asking questions." "About the money?" "Documentation." Vanessa frowned. "I thought accounting handled everything." "So did I." Nathan sat heavily. "They're requesting consulting records again." Vanessa thought for a moment. "I remember some invoices being delayed." Nathan looked up. "Why?" "Our department changed vendors during the campaign." "Could that be causing this?" "Possibly." Nathan relaxed slightly. "So nothing serious?" "I don't think so." Neither recognized that uncertainty itself had become a problem. Professional compliance depended upon certainty. Later that afternoon, Brooks Urban Development's accounting manager entered Richard Lawson's office carrying another folder. "We've got an issue." Richard looked up. "What now?" "The foundation requested deliverables from Bright Horizon Consulting." Richard reached for the folder. "They already received invoices. They want the completed reports." Richard flipped through several pages. "Where are they?" "We only have presentation summaries." "What about the detailed reports?" The accounting manager remained silent. Richard slowly removed his glasses. "Find them." "We've been trying." Richard leaned back. "When were they submitted?" "I can't confirm they ever were." The room became very quiet. Richard understood something important. An invoice confirmed payment. It did not confirm completed work. Across the city, Emily attended the weekly Oversight Committee briefing. Margaret Ellis reviewed ongoing compliance activities. Most organizations have completed secondary documentation. She turned another page. Brooks Urban Development remains partially outstanding. No frustration appeared in her voice, only professionalism. The compliance attorney joined through video once again. "If supporting records cannot be verified," Margaret answered, "we continue following policy." Emily appreciated those words. No special treatment, no premature judgment, exactly as it should be. The attorney continued, "If documentation remains incomplete after final notice, we recommend expanding financial review." Several committee members nodded. Emily remained silent until Margaret addressed her directly. "Emily." She looked up. "I agree with expanding review, only if standard deadlines expire." Margaret smiled slightly. "Thank you." Again, no one mentioned Nathan. No one mentioned the ceremony. No one referred to Emily's marriage. Inside that conference room, only procedures existed. As the meeting concluded, Margaret quietly remained behind. "I wanted to ask something." Emily waited. "Yesterday's recovered email." Emily nodded. "It isn't enough." "I know." Margaret studied her. "You aren't drawing conclusions?" "No." "What are you drawing?" Emily answered after a brief pause. "A list of questions." Margaret smiled with visible respect. "That's why you're good at this." Back at Brooks Urban Development, another problem emerged before the workday ended. A junior IT specialist entered Richard Lawson's office carrying a portable hard drive. "We restored several deleted email folders." Richard looked surprised. "Deleted?" "Archived automatically during server migration." "Anything important?" "We haven't reviewed everything." Richard accepted the drive. Thank you. As soon as the specialist left, Richard connected it to his computer. Hundreds of old emails appeared. Vendor negotiations, marketing drafts, budget revisions, nothing alarming. Then one folder caught his attention, communications budget adjustments. He opened it. Several emails involved Vanessa. Most appeared ordinary. One attachment refused to load. Corrupted file. Richard frowned. He made a note to contact IT the following morning. He still believed every issue had a reasonable explanation. So did Nathan. That evening, Emily visited Hannah for dinner. For the first time in days, work remained outside the conversation. They cooked pasta together, laughed about childhood memories, watered plants on Hannah's apartment balcony. As they washed dishes afterward, Hannah finally asked, "How are things with Nathan?" Emily dried another plate. "They're complicated." "Do you want to talk?" Emily thought carefully. "Not until I understand everything." Hannah recognized that answer immediately. "You've started documenting things." Emily smiled gently. "I never stopped." Hannah reached across the counter and squeezed her sister's hand. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't lose yourself while proving the truth." Emily nodded. "I won't." Driving home through light evening rain, Emily reflected upon those words. She wasn't searching for revenge. She wasn't trying to win. She simply refused to ignore facts once they appeared. Near midnight, another secure notification arrived. Technology services. Archive recovery complete. Additional emails available. Emily downloaded the files into the encrypted review folder. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds. She did not open them immediately. Fatigue invited mistakes. Instead, she organized everything into chronological order, labeled each file carefully, and shut down her computer. Tomorrow would provide enough time for careful reading. The narrator already knew that among those recovered emails lay the first complete conversation capable of transforming scattered questions into a coherent timeline. Not a confession, not undeniable proof. Something far more powerful: consistency. And in legal reviews, consistent facts often carried greater weight than dramatic accusations ever could. Nathan ended the same evening standing before another audience accepting congratulations during a private investor's reception. The applause sounded genuine. The praise felt well-deserved. He believed the difficult week revolved around paperwork that would soon disappear. He had no idea that while cameras continued celebrating his public image, invisible records stored deep inside encrypted servers had quietly begun telling a very different story. One that neither charm nor confidence, nor carefully managed appearances would be able to rewrite. By the second week of May, the story surrounding Brooks' urban development still appeared flawless to the public. Construction continued. Newspaper articles praised the company's community partnerships. Nathan Brooks accepted invitations to business forums almost every evening. To everyone watching from the outside, his future seemed brighter than ever. Inside his personal life, however, something colder had begun taking shape. Not suspicion, not guilt, distance. The narrator understood that people who spent enough time protecting an image often forgot how to protect the relationships that had once given that image meaning. 3 days after the ceremony, Nathan's mother, Linda Brooks, invited the family to Sunday dinner. The Brooks family had followed the tradition for years. Emily rarely missed it. She knew exactly how those gatherings usually unfolded. Nathan's younger brother, Michael, would talk about sports. Linda would discuss neighbors and church events. Nathan's father, George, usually remained quiet until politics entered the conversation. The dinners had once felt warm. Lately, they had become performances. Emily arrived 10 minutes early carrying a homemade apple pie. Linda opened the front door. For a brief moment, she smiled politely. Then her expression changed. "I thought Nathan said you weren't coming." Emily answered gently. "He didn't mention that to me." Linda stepped aside. "Well, come in." The hesitation lasted only seconds. It still hurt. Inside the dining room, family photographs covered one wall. Many included Nathan. Several showed vacations taken years earlier. Only 2 included Emily. Both had been placed near the bottom of the display. No one had intentionally hidden them. No one had intentionally highlighted them either. Small decisions often revealed larger truths. Nathan arrived nearly 20 minutes later. Vanessa was not with him. Even so, his attention remained fixed on work. He greeted everyone quickly before checking messages on his phone. Linda watched him proudly. "You're becoming impossible to keep up with." Nathan laughed. "Things are busy." George smiled. "Busy usually means successful." Nathan nodded. "We've got investors calling almost every day." Linda looked toward Emily. "You must be proud." Emily answered honestly. "I've always wanted Nathan to succeed." The sentence was simple. No bitterness, no sarcasm. Linda stirred her tea before speaking again. "I just wish he'd take better care of himself." Nathan laughed. "I'll survive." Linda smiled. "And maybe next time, Emily, you could encourage him to exercise instead of baking pies." The room fell briefly silent. Emily understood the real meaning. It wasn't about dessert. It rarely was. She smiled politely. "I'll remember that." Nathan said nothing. Years earlier, he would have interrupted. He would have defended her. Now he simply reached for another dinner roll. The conversation shifted toward the housing project. George looked genuinely impressed. "I watched your ceremony." Nathan smiled proudly. "It turned out well." Linda nodded enthusiastically. "The television cameras loved you." Then she added almost absent-mindedly, "I did wonder why Emily wasn't standing beside you." Nathan answered before anyone else could. "It wasn't the right setting." Linda looked confused. "What do you mean?" Nathan shrugged. "It was a professional event." George frowned slightly. "She's your wife." Nathan took another sip of water. The focus needed to stay on the company. Michael quietly glanced toward Emily before looking back at his plate. No one spoke for several seconds. Emily continued eating without reacting. The narrator already knew something the Brooks family did not. Emily's silence was no longer protecting Nathan. It was protecting the integrity of decisions she might soon be required to make professionally. After dinner, Linda followed Emily into the kitchen while dishes were being washed. She lowered her voice. "You've gained more weight." Emily continued rinsing plates. "I know. You should think about Nathan." Emily looked up calmly. "I do." Linda sighed. Successful men live differently. Emily waited. "They're constantly judged." Emily placed another clean plate into the drying rack. "So are successful women." Linda seemed surprised by the answer. "I suppose. But people judge different things." Emily smiled gently. "Yes." Neither woman spoke again. Across the room, Nathan laughed with George while discussing expansion plans in Oregon. He never noticed the conversation in the kitchen. He never saw Emily quietly dry her hands before returning to the dining room with exactly the same calm expression she had worn all afternoon. That evening, as they drove home, silence filled the car. Nathan finally spoke. "You didn't have to come today." Emily kept her eyes on the road. "It was family dinner." "I meant after what happened at the ceremony." Emily answered softly. I wasn't uncomfortable. Nathan looked toward the window. I've been thinking. Emily waited. I think it would be better if we attended public events separately. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she considered each word carefully. Is that what you want? It's better for everyone. For everyone, Nathan hesitated. For my work. Emily nodded once. I understand. Nathan expected questions. Instead, she changed the subject. Your mother enjoyed seeing you. Nathan looked confused. That's all you have to say? What else would you like me to say? He had no answer. Back at the house, Nathan disappeared into his upstairs office to prepare for another presentation. Emily entered her study. She opened her notebook. Family dinner. Nathan requested separate attendance at public events. No emotional observations, only facts. She closed the notebook and unlocked the encrypted compliance portal. Several new documents had arrived from internal audit. Daniel had attached a short note. Recovered vendor correspondence included. Emily opened the first file. Most emails involved scheduling meetings. Others discussed ordinary invoice processing. Then she reached another conversation involving Bright Horizon Consulting. Vanessa had written, "Can we allocate part of the communications campaign under strategic consulting until revised approvals are completed?" A reply followed from an accounting supervisor. "Only if finance signs off." Another email. "Nathan has already approved moving forward. We'll update paperwork later." Emily stopped reading. She leaned back in her chair. Again, not proof of misconduct. Approvals might indeed have been completed later. The question was simple. Had they? She searched the amendment database once more. Nothing. She opened another notebook used exclusively for compliance reviews. Email references pending approval documentation. Cross-check finance authorization. Request timeline. Her notes remained clinical. No adjectives, no speculation. Exactly the way they would appear if reviewed years later in court. The following morning, the internal audit unit gathered for its scheduled review. Daniel projected a spreadsheet onto the conference room screen. We've reconstructed the sequence of several consulting payments. Emily studied the dates. March 12th, March 27th, April 8th, April 15th. Every payment preceded the paperwork meant to authorize expanded communications spending. Margaret folded her hands. Can we verify whether retroactive approval exists? Daniel answered. We're still looking. The compliance attorney joined remotely. If no authorization exists, we continue collecting evidence. Emily finally spoke. The timeline matters more than assumptions. Everyone looked toward her. If documents exist, we'll find them. And if they don't? Daniel asked. Emily answered quietly. Then the records will speak for themselves. No one disagreed. Meanwhile, Nathan arrived at company headquarters in unusually high spirits. A national construction magazine had requested a feature interview. Vanessa entered carrying fresh marketing concepts. Congratulations. Nathan smiled. Again. They want you on the cover. He laughed. I never imagined this. Vanessa placed another folder on the desk. The accounting department also needs signatures. Nathan barely glanced at the documents. Routine. I think so. He signed several pages quickly, one after another, without reading every attachment. Vanessa watched silently. She had grown accustomed to Nathan trusting others with administrative details. He believed leadership required vision. Emily believed leadership required verification. The difference between those philosophies was becoming more significant every day. Late that afternoon, Emily received confirmation that one final archive recovery had been completed. Hundreds of deleted emails had been restored following the company's server migration months earlier. She downloaded the secure package without opening it immediately. Instead, she carefully labeled the folder "Recovered Communications Pending Review." She placed it beside every other document already collected: invoices, budget revisions, committee minutes, bank summaries, recovered correspondence. Everything remained organized. Everything remained chronological. Everything remained untouched by personal opinion. Outside her office window, construction cranes continued lifting steel into the Seattle skyline. Nathan saw those cranes as symbols of ambition. Emily saw something different. Every structure depended upon a solid foundation. Every investigation depended upon the same principle. And somewhere within the growing collection of recovered communications, the foundation beneath Nathan's carefully built public image had begun developing cracks that no photographer could see. 2 weeks after the public ceremony, the compliance review entered a new phase. Up to that point, the process had remained largely administrative. Documents were requested, files were compared, missing records were noted, clarifications were expected. Now, for the first time, independent financial analysts began connecting information across multiple systems. Not because anyone believed Brooks Urban Development had committed fraud, because professional oversight required every significant grant recipient to withstand the same level of scrutiny. The narrator already knew that truth often emerged not from a single dramatic discovery, but from dozens of ordinary records, quietly agreeing with one another. Monday morning began inside the Foundation's Financial Analysis Center. Unlike the committee meeting rooms, this department contained almost no decorations. Rows of computer monitors displayed spreadsheets, audit software, and secure banking databases. Analysts spoke quietly. Printers hummed continuously. Every transaction left a trail. Emily entered, carrying only her notebook and a slim folder marked Quarterly Review. Daniel was already waiting. "We've finished reconciling the payment history." Emily placed her folder on the conference table. "Any significant differences?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I think you should see it yourself." He projected a timeline across the large screen. Approved grant installments appeared in blue. Vendor payments appeared in gray. Consulting invoices appeared in green. Then several red markers appeared beside a handful of transactions. Emily studied them without speaking. "What do the red markers represent?" Daniel answered carefully. "Payments that appear inconsistent with supporting documentation." "Inconsistent how?" "The invoice dates don't match the banking transfers." Emily stepped closer to the screen. One consulting payment had supposedly been approved on March 27th. The banking record showed funds transferred 4 days earlier. Another reimbursement carried a digital approval timestamp created after the payment had already been processed. Emily frowned slightly. "Can system clocks explain this?" "We checked." "No." Daniel shook his head. "The banking server's accounting software and document management system all use synchronized time records." Emily remained silent. A timing discrepancy alone still proved nothing. Human error remained possible. Delayed uploads happened. Administrative corrections occurred every day. She opened her notebook. Verify approval workflow. Request original metadata. No assumptions. Daniel smiled faintly. "I knew you'd say that." Emily looked up. "What?" Everyone else immediately asks whether something is wrong. Emily closed the notebook. "My job is to ask whether something is true." Daniel nodded with quiet respect. Across the city, Brooks Urban Development prepared for another milestone. Nathan had been invited to present future expansion plans before a regional investment consortium. His office buzzed with optimism. Employees congratulated one another. New contracts continued arriving. The public believed the company had become one of Seattle's greatest success stories. Inside Nathan's executive suite, Vanessa organized presentation materials. The investors want updated financial projections. Nathan loosened his tie. They'll have them. The accounting department requested one correction. Nathan looked briefly annoyed. What now? A few consulting expenses need clarification. Nathan sighed. They're still dealing with that? I think it's just paperwork. Nathan leaned back. Everything eventually becomes paperwork. He smiled dismissively. Vanessa returned the smile. Neither realized that paperwork had already begun telling a story neither of them wanted to hear. Later that afternoon, Emily attended a secure meeting with the Foundation's Legal Compliance Council. Attorney Rebecca Lawson joined through encrypted video. Stacks of digital files appeared across everyone's screens. Rebecca began calmly. Today's purpose is preventative. Emily appreciated that word. Preventative, not accusatory. Rebecca continued. When documentation becomes increasingly complex, we establish an evidentiary timeline before drawing conclusions. She displayed a flow chart. Grant approval, fund release, bank transfer, vendor payment, supporting documentation, independent verification. Emily followed every step carefully. Rebecca pointed toward several highlighted sections. The current concern is sequence. Daniel added, several supporting approvals appear to have been created after expenditures occurred. Rebecca folded her hands. If legitimate explanations exist, documentation will resolve the issue. Emily spoke quietly. And if it doesn't, Rebecca answered without hesitation. Then chronology becomes evidence. No dramatic music, no shocking announcement, only one sentence. Chronology becomes evidence. Emily wrote it into her notebook. After the meeting, Margaret Ellis stopped beside Emily's office. How are you holding up? Emily smiled gently. I'm working. Margaret understood exactly what that meant. Work allowed Emily to remain objective. Emotion did not. There may be another complication. Emily waited. The board has scheduled a special oversight session. For all projects, Margaret hesitated. No. Emily already knew the answer. Brooks Urban Development. Margaret nodded. The inconsistencies require formal discussion. Emily remained remarkably calm. When? Next Thursday? Emily thanked her. After Margaret left, she sat quietly for several minutes without opening a single file. She wasn't thinking about Nathan. She was thinking about responsibility. If the evidence ultimately confirmed ordinary administrative mistakes, she would recommend exactly that. If the evidence showed something more serious, her marriage could not influence her recommendation. Years earlier, when she accepted her position, she had promised herself one principle: no personal relationship would ever become stronger than professional integrity. Across town, Brooks Urban Development's finance department struggled with growing pressure. Richard Lawson stood before several accountants reviewing another request from the foundation. They want original banking confirmations. One accountant frowned. We already submitted payment summaries. They want bank-generated confirmations. Another employee looked uncomfortable. Some older records are archived. Recover them. We're trying. Richard rubbed his forehead. This review is becoming excessive. A younger accountant quietly replied, No, it's becoming detailed. The room fell silent. Richard knew the employee wasn't being disrespectful. He was being accurate. Detailed reviews revealed details. Nathan entered unexpectedly. Status. Richard handed him the latest request. They're asking for banking confirmations now. Nathan scanned the document. This is ridiculous. Richard answered carefully. They're entitled to request them. Nathan tossed the papers onto the desk. We've done nothing wrong. No one's saying otherwise. Then why this? Richard paused. They're verifying. Nathan walked toward the window. How much longer? I don't know. Nathan exhaled slowly. Make it go away. Richard didn't answer, because no accountant possessed the authority to make documentation disappear, only to produce it. That evening, Emily reviewed the first batch of original banking confirmations transmitted directly from the financial institutions. Unlike internal spreadsheets, these records could not easily be modified after creation. Each transfer carried permanent timestamps, authorization codes, digital verification numbers. Emily compared them against company submissions. Most matched perfectly. Then she reached another consulting payment. The banking confirmation identified the receiving account, Bright Horizon Consulting. She searched previous files. The same account number appeared under 3 different project descriptions: community outreach, strategic consulting, brand development. Interesting. She opened another secure database. Corporate vendor registrations. Bright Horizon remained listed as a legitimate consulting company. Nothing suspicious there. But another detail caught her attention. Nearly 85% of payments to that vendor originated from Brooks Urban Development during the past year. Daniel entered quietly, carrying another folder. We traced additional transfers. Emily looked up. Anything new? He handed her several pages. Look at the authorization sequence. Emily did. Each banking transfer required 2 approvals. Most organizations followed that rule carefully. Several Brooks Urban Development transactions showed Nathan's digital authorization. The secondary approval belonged to Richard Lawson. Again, nothing improper. Company policy allowed both men to authorize expenditures. Emily looked farther down the page. One payment differed. Nathan's approval appeared. The secondary authorization belonged to Vanessa Collins. Emily looked toward Daniel. Is communications authorized for financial approval? Daniel answered, not according to the organizational chart. Emily said nothing. Instead, she highlighted the transaction, verify delegated authority. No assumptions. Daniel almost laughed. You really won't speculate, will you? Emily smiled. Speculation has never survived a courtroom. Outside evening settled across Seattle. Nathan stood beneath bright lights, once again delivering another confident presentation to investors who applauded his ambitious expansion plans. He spoke about vision, growth, leadership, trust. Every word sounded sincere. Miles away, Emily continued comparing timestamps, banking records, authorization logs, and vendor registrations beneath the soft light of her office lamp. Neither could see the other. Yet both were shaping the same future. Nathan through speeches, Emily through evidence. The narrator already knew which one would ultimately prove stronger. Because applause disappeared the moment an audience went home. Official records remained, long after the lights faded, long after memories blurred, long after carefully crafted images collapsed beneath the quiet weight of documented truth. Thursday arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation. For Nathan Brooks, it promised another opportunity to reinforce his growing reputation. The invitation from the Foundation's Oversight Board had been described as a routine strategic review before the release of the next funding installment. His financial team assured him they had assembled every requested document. Vanessa reminded him to remain confident. Richard Lawson insisted that any remaining questions were administrative. Nathan believed the meeting would end exactly as every previous public appearance had, with another handshake, another photograph, another success. The narrator already knew that this meeting would not end in applause. It would end with silence. Not the peaceful silence Emily valued. The heavy silence that follows when assumptions collide with facts. The Foundation headquarters occupied a modern glass building overlooking Elliott Bay. Unlike corporate offices decorated to impress investors, the Foundation emphasized transparency rather than luxury. Meeting rooms featured simple furnishings, digital presentation equipment, and walls displaying completed community projects instead of executive portraits. At 9 o'clock, sharp members of the Oversight Board began arriving. Margaret Ellis reviewed the agenda one final time. Attorney Rebecca Lawson organized legal reference materials beside her laptop. Daniel prepared the financial presentation. Independent auditors verified secure access to supporting records. Everything followed procedure. Nothing had been arranged to embarrass anyone. Emily arrived carrying only her leather notebook and a slim portfolio. She greeted each colleague warmly. "Good morning." "Morning, Emily." Margaret smiled. "Ready?" Emily answered with quiet honesty. "I'm ready to follow the evidence." Nothing more. No one mentioned Nathan. No one mentioned the ceremony. Professionalism remained intact. At precisely 9:30, Nathan entered the conference room accompanied by Richard Lawson and Vanessa Collins. He wore another impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Vanessa carried presentation materials. Richard brought several thick binders containing financial records. Nathan smiled confidently as he greeted the room. "Thank you all for having us." Margaret returned the greeting politely. "We appreciate your attendance." Everyone took their seats. Nathan noticed Emily sitting midway down one side of the long conference table. For a brief moment, he looked surprised. He had never seen her inside this building, never imagined she belonged there. He assumed she had been invited as an observer because of their marriage. Their eyes met only briefly. Emily acknowledged him with a courteous nod. Nothing more. No resentment, no discomfort, only professionalism. Nathan looked away first. Margaret officially opened the meeting. Today's purpose is to review financial compliance before the scheduled release of the next funding installment. Nathan nodded confidently. "We're happy to answer any questions." Daniel projected the first series of slides. Construction milestones, engineering inspections, community participation, environmental compliance. Everything appeared positive. Nathan relaxed. This looked exactly like every previous review. Then the presentation changed. Financial reconciliation, Daniel spoke calmly. "Our review identified several expenditures requiring clarification." Nathan leaned slightly forward. Richard opened one of the binders. Daniel continued. "The first item concerns consulting expenditures exceeding original projections." Richard immediately responded. "We've included updated invoices." Daniel nodded. "We received them." He clicked to the next slide. "The question concerns authorization timing rather than invoice existence." Nathan frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel displayed two documents side by side. The first showed a banking transfer. The second displayed the internal approval. The payment was processed 4 days before documented approval. Richard adjusted his glasses. We may have uploaded paperwork late. Rebecca Lawson spoke for the first time. That is one possibility. Her voice remained calm. Do you have evidence supporting delayed upload rather than delayed approval? Richard searched through several pages. We'll need to verify. Rebecca nodded. That's acceptable. No accusation, only another question. Nathan remained composed. He still believed everything could be explained. The meeting continued. Another slide appeared. Consulting expenditures categorized under multiple budget headings. Daniel explained the sequence. The same vendor appears under community outreach, strategic consulting, and brand development. Nathan answered confidently. They provided multiple services. Daniel nodded. Supporting deliverables. Richard reached for another binder. We're still locating some reports. Margaret quietly made a note. Emily remained silent. She wrote nothing. She simply listened. The board moved to the next topic. Original banking confirmations, digital authorization records, vendor registration verification. Each subject generated another series of factual questions. Nathan noticed something unusual. No one sounded hostile. No one attempted to trap him. Every question remained narrowly focused upon documentation. That professionalism somehow felt more unsettling than open confrontation would have. After nearly an hour, Rebecca looked toward Daniel. Please display the authorization sequence. A detailed timeline appeared across the large screen. Every payment, every approval, every supporting document, chronologically arranged. Nathan studied it carefully. Richard leaned forward. Vanessa looked increasingly uncomfortable. Rebecca pointed toward one highlighted transaction. This payment lists Miss Collins as secondary authorizing official. Nathan turned toward Vanessa. I thought finance handled approvals. Vanessa looked surprised herself. I never approved payments. Daniel answered carefully. The digital authorization was submitted using your credentials. Vanessa shook her head immediately. I don't remember doing that. Rebecca remained composed. We're not suggesting intent. She looked toward the technology specialist seated near the back of the room. Can system access logs clarify? The specialist opened another file. Yes. Several seconds passed while data loaded. The authorization originated from Miss Collins's workstation. Vanessa stared silently at the screen. She looked toward Richard. I don't understand. Richard frowned. I'll need to investigate. Nathan finally interrupted. There has to be an explanation. Rebecca nodded. We expect one. Again, no accusation, only expectation. Emily continued observing quietly. She had not spoken since the meeting began. Nathan noticed that. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering what exactly Emily did every day. He had always assumed she worked in administrative support. Nothing about today's meeting resembled ordinary administration. Margaret looked toward Emily. Would you summarize the procedural status for the board? Nathan instinctively turned toward his wife. Emily opened a thin folder. Her voice remained calm. The project satisfied engineering compliance. She turned one page. Community engagement benchmarks remain acceptable. Another page. Financial documentation remains incomplete in several categories. She paused only long enough to verify a figure. Under Foundation policy, unresolved documentation requires postponement of further disbursement until compliance is achieved. Nathan stared at her. She wasn't expressing an opinion. She wasn't criticizing him. She was simply explaining policy. One board member asked, recommendation. Emily answered without hesitation. Continue standard compliance procedures. No additional recommendation. Not until documentation is complete. Nathan felt strangely relieved. Emily could have embarrassed him. She hadn't. She could have referenced the ceremony. She hadn't. She treated him exactly as she treated every other grant recipient. Professionally. Nothing more. Rebecca folded her hands. The board will now review recovered correspondence related to consulting expenditures. Nathan looked toward Richard. What correspondence? Richard quietly answered. I'm not sure. Daniel connected another secure database. Dozens of recovered emails appeared listed chronologically. Only subject lines were visible. Budget adjustments, vendor coordination, communications planning, authorization requests. When Nathan's confidence weakened slightly, he hadn't realized archived emails had been recovered. Rebecca spoke carefully. Today we will not interpret these communications. Nathan looked confused. We won't. No. She continued. We will simply verify authenticity before further analysis. Technology specialists confirmed digital signatures, server timestamps, archive integrity. Every email passed verification. Nathan remained silent. Vanessa looked increasingly pale. Emily watched the verification process without changing expression. Authenticity mattered before interpretation. Facts before conclusions, exactly as she had always believed. After nearly 2 hours, Margaret closed her folder. The board has reached a procedural decision. Everyone looked toward her. Release of the next funding installment will be temporarily postponed pending completion of documentation review. Nathan immediately responded. How long? Rebecca answered. That depends entirely upon the records. Richard nodded slowly. We'll cooperate fully. We appreciate that. Margaret looked around the room. This meeting is adjourned. Chairs moved quietly. Board members gathered their files. No one celebrated. No one argued. Nathan remained seated for several moments. As people slowly left the conference room, he noticed Emily organizing her notebook. She prepared to leave without speaking. Almost instinctively, he called after her. Emily? She turned politely. Yes. What exactly is your role here? For a brief moment, silence returned to the room. Emily answered with the same calm honesty that had guided every decision she made. I oversee grant compliance. Nathan blinked. You oversee it? I oversee the process. Nothing more. No explanation. No dramatic revelation. She nodded courteously before walking toward the door. Nathan watched her leave. For the first time since their marriage began, he realized he knew remarkably little about the quiet woman he had spent years believing he fully understood. And outside the conference room, beyond the polished hallways and carefully organized files, the next stage of the investigation had already begun. Because authenticated records no longer asked whether questions existed. They asked something far more serious, whether the answers could withstand the law. The meeting ended without raised voices. No one stormed out. No accusations echoed through the conference room. Board members simply gathered their files, exchanged professional farewells, and returned to their offices. Nathan Brooks had expected relief after surviving what he believed was a difficult review. Instead, an unfamiliar weight settled over him. For the first time in years, confidence had been replaced by uncertainty. The narrator already knew why. Nathan had entered the meeting believing documentation existed to support his success. He left realizing documentation existed to verify every decision he had ever signed. Those were not the same thing. Outside the Foundation headquarters, gray clouds drifted over Elliott Bay. Nathan stood beside his car without unlocking it. Richard Lawson joined him several moments later. "We'll get everything organized," Richard said. Nathan looked toward the parking lot. "You really think this is only paperwork?" Richard hesitated. "I don't know." Nathan turned. "You've never said that before." Richard sighed. "I've always believed we could explain everything." "And now?" "I believe we need to verify everything before making promises." Nathan disliked that answer. It sounded too much like uncertainty. "Vanessa?" Or approached quietly. "I'm sorry." Nathan frowned. "For what?" "My authorization appeared on that payment. You said you didn't approve it." "I don't remember approving it." Nathan looked from Vanessa to Richard. There has to be some mistake. Richard answered honestly. "I hope so." Hope. It was a weaker word than certainty. Nathan drove back to Brooks Urban Development without turning on the radio. His phone buzzed constantly. Congratulations from investors, interview requests, messages from reporters asking about future expansion. He ignored every notification. For the first time, public attention felt exhausting instead of rewarding. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her office exactly as she had after hundreds of previous board meetings. She placed her notebook inside the top drawer, removed her blazer, poured herself a cup of tea. Then she opened the secure case management system. The board's decision had already been entered. Funding installment. Temporarily suspended pending documentation review. Status compliance investigation expanded. Emily read the entry once before opening the next assignment. The expanded review required 3 categories of evidence: financial records, electronic correspondence, supporting deliverables. Everything would now be verified independently. Nothing would rely upon memory alone. Daniel knocked gently on her open office door. "Do you have a minute?" Emily smiled. "Of course." He entered carrying another encrypted drive. Technology completed the final archive recovery. Emily accepted it carefully. Everything, as far as they can determine. She looked at the drive. Chain of custody documented. Daniel nodded. Every step. Emily appreciated that answer. If evidence ever reached court documentation regarding how records had been preserved, would matter almost as much as the records themselves. Let's begin. Inside the Digital Evidence Laboratory, technology specialists connected the recovered archive to a secure forensic workstation. Nothing could be edited. Nothing could be deleted. Every action performed by investigators would itself be recorded. Rebecca Lawson joined them. "Our objective today is authentication. Not interpretation, authentication." Emily nodded. The technician began. "We recovered approximately 12,000 archived emails." Another screen appeared. Most concern ordinary business communication. Vendor scheduling, employee announcements, routine accounting. Nothing remarkable. Then the technician filtered messages connected to Bright Horizon Consulting. 217 emails remained. Daniel quietly exhaled. "That's more than expected." Emily simply wrote another note. "Review chronologically." The technician opened the earliest exchange. Most messages involved harmless planning, meeting schedules, presentation drafts, advertising layouts. Emily read carefully. Nothing inappropriate. Rebecca folded her arms. "Continue." The next series discussed revised communication budgets, again largely ordinary. Then another email appeared. From Vanessa Collins to Richard Lawson. Subject: budget reallocation. The message read, "Nathan wants the campaign moving immediately. Finance can complete the amendment afterward." Correct Richard's reply followed 34 minutes later. Only if approval is documented before final reporting. Another response appeared. I'll speak with him. Emily read every line twice. Still, nothing illegal, nothing conclusive. Only another incomplete conversation. Rebecca looked toward the technician. Any attachments? 1. Open it. The attachment contained a draft budget, watermarked, unapproved. Emily highlighted the word, draft. She underlined it inside her notebook. Important draft documents often changed before implementation. Assumptions remained dangerous. Hours passed. The team continued reviewing email after email. Patterns slowly emerged. Communication requests, budget discussions, scheduling delays, missing reports. No dramatic confession appeared. No one wrote anything resembling intentional fraud. Instead, something more subtle began taking shape. Repeated reminders, repeated delays, repeated references to paperwork that would be completed later. Rebecca finally spoke. I'd like banking records displayed beside these communications. Daniel synchronized both timelines. Emails appeared above, transfers below, approvals beside them. Emily stared silently at the screen. One transaction stood out immediately. March 27th, email requesting amendment. March 26th, payment already completed. She checked another. Same sequence, another. Again. Rebecca pointed calmly. The chronology repeats. Daniel nodded. 4 separate occasions. Emily spoke quietly. The paperwork consistently follows the expenditure. No one answered, because everyone could see it. The evidence wasn't becoming stronger because of one dramatic document. It was becoming stronger because independent records continued agreeing with each other. Across town, Nathan called an emergency executive meeting. Senior managers gathered inside the boardroom. Richard projected the foundation's documentation requests. We need complete cooperation. Department heads nodded. Nathan looked around the room. If anyone knows records are missing, tell us now. Silence. Finally, the marketing director raised a hand. Some campaign files were managed directly through Vanessa. Vanessa looked surprised. Only communications. The director continued. Bright Horizon reported to you. Yes. Did they submit final reports? Vanessa hesitated. I assumed finance received them. Richard frowned. We didn't. Another silence. Nathan rubbed his forehead. Find them. We're trying. No one argued. Everyone simply realized that locating missing documentation had become the company's highest priority. Late that afternoon, Emily received another notification. Internal audit had completed reconciliation with bank-generated metadata. She opened the report. Every banking authorization included permanent digital fingerprints, user credentials, terminal identification, timestamp verification, location logs. The information confirmed something important. The transactions themselves had not been altered afterward. The records were authentic. Daniel entered carrying printed summaries. The metadata supports the banking confirmations. Emily nodded slowly. So the sequence is accurate. It appears so. She closed the file. Again, no conclusion, only another verified fact. Rebecca joined them several minutes later. We're preparing the preliminary legal memorandum. Emily looked up. Recommendations, Rebecca answered carefully. Not recommendations. Findings. Verified observations. Emily appreciated the distinction. Legal language mattered. Verified observations could be defended. Speculation could not. Rebecca continued. The board will receive the memorandum tomorrow morning. Emily asked one final question. Have we confirmed whether all requested deliverables exist? Rebecca looked toward Daniel. He answered quietly. No. How many remain missing? 12. Emily made another note. Outstanding deliverables? 12. She closed the notebook. Outside the office windows, rain began falling steadily across Seattle. Traffic slowed. Construction cranes disappeared behind low clouds. Nathan sat alone inside his executive office, staring at the city skyline. His desk overflowed with awards-framed magazine covers and congratulatory plaques. Only now did he notice something strange. None of those accomplishments could answer the Foundation's questions. Not one trophy could produce a missing report. Not one interview could explain inconsistent chronology. Image had carried him remarkably far. Documentation had quietly caught up. As evening settled over the city, Emily organized every verified record into a master evidence index. Emails, bank confirmations, authorization logs, vendor records, meeting minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just facts, thousands of them. The narrator already knew what no one else fully understood. The investigation had reached the point where individual pieces of evidence no longer stood alone. Emails supported bank records. Bank records supported timestamps. Timestamps supported authorization logs. Independent systems created by different organizations for different purposes had begun telling the same story. And in every courtroom, every regulatory hearing, and every professional review, there was one principle more persuasive than emotion. When separate records preserved independently arrive at the same conclusion, truth no longer needs anyone to raise their voice. It simply waits for the moment when it is read aloud. The preliminary legal memorandum reached the Foundation board before 8 o'clock Friday morning. No dramatic language filled its pages. No accusations appeared in bold type. The document contained only verified observations, supporting references, and recommendations for procedural next steps. Attorney Rebecca Lawson had written every sentence with the same principle Emily had followed throughout the investigation. Facts first, interpretation later. The narrator already knew that this quiet report carried more weight than every newspaper headline Nathan Brooks had collected during the previous year. Because headlines shaped opinion. Official findings shaped consequences. At Brooks Urban Development, the atmosphere had changed noticeably. Employees still answered phones. Construction crews still reported to job sites. Meetings continued. Yet conversations had become quieter. Managers closed office doors before discussing financial matters. The accounting department remained buried beneath stacks of archived records. Rumors traveled faster than official updates. No one knew exactly what the Foundation had discovered. Everyone understood the review had become serious. Nathan arrived before 7:30. He barely acknowledged the receptionist before walking directly into Richard Lawson's office. Richard looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes. We found 6 additional consulting reports. Nathan immediately asked, and the other 12? Richard shook his head. Still missing. Nathan stared silently across the room. How does something like this happen? Richard answered honestly. I don't know. Nathan paced slowly. I trusted people. I know. Nathan stopped walking. No. His voice softened. I stopped checking. Richard didn't disagree. For the first time since founding the company, Nathan recognized a truth he had ignored for years. Leadership could not be delegated as completely as he had imagined. Across the city, the Foundation board assembled for another closed session. Margaret Ellis reviewed the agenda. Today's purpose is determining procedural response. Rebecca distributed printed copies of the legal memorandum. Emily quietly accepted hers without opening it immediately. She already knew the evidence. She had helped organize it. Rebecca began. The review identified recurring chronology inconsistencies. She turned another page. Supporting documentation remains incomplete despite repeated requests. Another page. Electronic correspondence confirms repeated references to retroactive administrative approvals. She paused. No conclusion regarding intent is offered at this stage. Emily appreciated those words. Intent required evidence beyond documentation. The board discussed each finding individually. Construction compliance, satisfactory. Engineering quality, satisfactory. Community benefit, satisfactory. Financial administration, incomplete. Vendor documentation, incomplete. Authorization chronology, requires explanation. Every category received independent consideration. Nothing merged into assumptions. After nearly 90 minutes, Margaret looked toward Rebecca. Recommendation, Rebecca answered calmly. Refer the matter for formal regulatory review while preserving continued cooperation. One board member asked, should funding be terminated? Rebecca shook her head. Not yet. Emily spoke for only the second time. The project still benefits the community. Several heads nodded. Emily continued. Protecting public resources also means protecting unfinished projects whenever legally possible. Margaret smiled slightly. A balanced recommendation. The motion passed unanimously. Funding would remain suspended. The project itself would continue under enhanced oversight. Nathan would receive an opportunity to respond through formal legal procedures. No one celebrated. Justice wasn't something professionals celebrated. It was something they carefully maintained. Later that afternoon, Nathan received official notification. The envelope bore the foundation's seal. Richard closed the office door behind him. Nathan opened the letter slowly. He read every page without speaking. Finally, he looked up. They're referring the file. Richard nodded. To regulatory authorities. Nathan placed the papers carefully onto his desk. They think I committed fraud. Richard answered immediately. No. Nathan looked confused. They think documentation requires legal review. Nathan laughed bitterly. That sounds like the polite version. Richard remained silent, because sometimes the polite version was also the accurate one. Nathan leaned back heavily. What happens now? Our attorneys respond. And then, Richard hesitated. They'll probably request interviews. Nathan nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he felt completely unprepared. Not because he lacked intelligence, because confidence built from assumptions rarely survived detailed questions. Meanwhile, Emily spent the afternoon organizing evidence transfer documentation. Every digital file copied for regulators required chain of custody certification. Every banking record received authentication references. Every recovered email included preservation logs. Daniel watched Emily work. You've checked those forms 3 times. Emily smiled faintly. Actually, she looked down. 4. Daniel laughed quietly. No wonder everyone trusts your files. Emily answered without looking up. They're not supposed to trust me. He frowned. They're supposed to trust the process. That sentence stayed with Daniel long after he returned to his office. The following Monday, representatives from the State Financial Compliance Authority arrived. Their lead investigator, Michael Reynolds, introduced himself professionally. We appreciate the Foundation's cooperation. Rebecca shook his hand. We've prepared everything requested. Emily remained in the background, organizing digital evidence. Michael noticed her. "You coordinated the compliance review." Emily nodded. "I coordinated documentation." He smiled politely. "I've heard excellent things about your records." Emily answered simply, "They belong to the foundation." Michael spent nearly 4 hours reviewing preserved evidence. He asked remarkably few questions. Most answers already existed inside the documentation. By late afternoon, he closed the final folder. "Excellent work." Rebecca thanked him. Michael continued, "This is one of the most organized evidence transfers I've reviewed." Emily said nothing. Praise had never interested her. Accuracy had. Across town, Brooks Urban Development's legal counsel prepared Nathan for upcoming interviews. Attorney Susan Mitchell placed several folders across the conference table. "We'll begin with basic chronology." Nathan nodded. "When did funding become available?" Nathan answered. "After our presentation." Susan looked up. "Are you certain?" Nathan frowned. "That's what I understood." Susan opened another document. "The foundation approved preliminary funding before the presentation." Nathan blinked. "I didn't know that." Susan continued. "Who explained the approval process to you?" Nathan remained silent. No one had. He had simply assumed. Another question followed. Who served as foundation liaison? Nathan thought. "I dealt with several people." Susan waited. "Did you ever meet the individual responsible for compliance oversight?" Nathan slowly shook his head. "No." Susan made another note. Several more questions followed. Each one exposed another assumption Nathan had never bothered to verify. By the interview's end, Susan closed her notebook. "You've relied heavily on delegation." Nathan looked exhausted. "I trusted people." Susan answered carefully. "Trust isn't a legal defense." That sentence echoed inside Nathan's mind long after he left the office. That evening, he returned home earlier than usual. The house felt unusually quiet. Emily sat in the living room reading. She looked up briefly. "Good evening." Nathan stood awkwardly near the doorway. "We need to talk." Emily closed her book. "I'm listening." Nathan sat across from her. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he asked, "How long have you worked for the foundation?" Emily answered honestly. "Almost 15 years." Nathan stared. 15, she nodded. "I thought you handled administrative support." Emily smiled gently. "I handle administration." Nathan looked confused. She continued, "Grant administration." Again, no boasting. No explanation beyond what was necessary. Nathan rubbed his forehead. "I never asked." Emily answered quietly, "No." Silence returned. Nathan looked around the familiar living room. Family photographs, bookshelves, the same home they had shared for over a decade. How had he failed to notice such an important part of his wife's life because he had stopped asking? Because he had assumed. Because appearances had gradually become more interesting than understanding. Emily stood. "I'm making tea." Nathan watched her walk toward the kitchen. She moved with the same calm dignity she had carried into every board meeting. The same quiet patience that had frustrated him for years. Only now did he begin recognizing it for what it truly was. Strength. Not dramatic strength. Not loud strength. The steady kind built through discipline, responsibility, and truth. The narrator already knew Nathan's realization had arrived far too late to prevent legal consequences. The investigation no longer belonged to Emily. It belonged to independent authorities, following verified evidence wherever it led. And while Nathan finally began understanding the extraordinary woman he had spent years overlooking official procedures, had already moved beyond regret. From this point forward, apologies could mend hearts. They could not alter records. They could not erase timestamps. They could not rewrite the quiet, meticulous trail of truth that Emily had preserved long before anyone imagined it would someday matter. 3 months after the foundation suspended the final installment of funding, the story finally reached the public, not through rumors, not through anonymous leaks, not through sensational headlines. It began with an official regulatory statement confirming that the financial review of Brooks Urban Development had concluded its preliminary investigative phase. The announcement contained no emotional language, only dates, procedures, verified findings. The narrator already knew something the public did not. The greatest surprise would not be the investigation itself. It would be discovering who had quietly protected the integrity of the project from the very beginning. By Monday morning, reporters gathered outside the State Financial Compliance Authority. Television vans lined the street. Business journalists exchanged copies of the official briefing. Most expected another ordinary corporate compliance story. Few anticipated how deeply connected it was to one of Seattle's most celebrated entrepreneurs. Nathan Brooks arrived with his attorney shortly before 9. The confidence that once defined every public appearance had changed. He no longer smiled for cameras. He no longer paused for interviews. He entered the building without looking toward the reporters calling his name. Inside, representatives from the foundation had already taken their seats. Margaret Ellis, Rebecca Lawson, Daniel, several independent auditors. Emily arrived quietly through a separate entrance reserved for official participants. She carried the same leather notebook she had used throughout the investigation. Nothing about her appearance suggested power. A simple navy suit, minimal jewelry, organized files, calm expression. The security officer at the entrance greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning. Conference room A is ready." "Thank you." Nathan happened to look up as Emily walked down the hallway. For a moment, he simply watched. No cameras surrounded her. No reporters recognized her. Yet nearly every professional inside the building acknowledged her with quiet respect. He had never seen that before. Or perhaps he had simply never noticed. The hearing began precisely at 9:30. Lead investigator Michael Reynolds opened the proceedings. "This is an administrative compliance hearing." He looked around the room. "The purpose is to review verified findings and determine appropriate regulatory action." Everyone understood the distinction. This was not a criminal trial. It was an official regulatory process governed by documentation rather than emotion. Michael continued. The investigation identified repeated procedural failures in financial authorization and documentation. A large screen displayed the first timeline. Approved grant conditions, documented expenditures, recovered communications, independent banking confirmations. Every entry referenced authenticated records. No opinions appeared anywhere. Nathan listened quietly. His attorney occasionally whispered brief explanations. Emily never looked toward Nathan. Her attention remained on the evidence. Michael proceeded methodically. The review confirmed that several expenditures were processed before required administrative approvals had been completed. Another slide appeared. Supporting documentation remained incomplete despite multiple requests. Another. Several consulting deliverables could not be verified. Rebecca Lawson spoke next. The foundation has not alleged that the community housing project itself lacked value. She paused. The concern has always involved stewardship of charitable funds. That distinction mattered. The Affordable Housing Initiative had genuinely helped families. Construction quality remained strong. The problem lay in how portions of the funding had been administered, not why the homes existed. After nearly an hour of testimony, Michael addressed another subject. We would now like to acknowledge the Foundation's compliance coordination. Nathan barely paid attention. He assumed another department would receive routine recognition. Michael continued. This investigation remained possible because documentation standards were maintained consistently from the beginning of the grant. He turned toward Emily. Miss Emily Carter. Nathan slowly lifted his head. Michael smiled professionally. Would you please stand for the record? Emily rose quietly. No applause followed. None was appropriate. Michael continued. Miss Carter served as Executive Director of Strategic Grant Administration and supervised compliance procedures associated with this project. A soft murmur spread through the observers seated behind the official participants. Several journalists immediately looked up from their notebooks. Nathan stared at Emily, Executive Director. He felt as though he had misunderstood an entire decade of his own marriage. Michael continued reading. Her office disclosed potential conflicts of interest at the beginning of the review. Another document appeared. Independent committees not Miss Carter approved grant funding to Brooks Urban Development. Another page. Miss Carter participated only in procedural oversight after formal conflict disclosures were accepted. Every statement was supported by documentation. Every sentence referenced official records. One journalist quietly whispered, "Wait, that's his wife." Another answered, "The one from the ceremony." The realization spread quickly through the room. Nathan lowered his eyes. For the first time, he remembered every occasion he had introduced Emily merely as someone who worked for a nonprofit. He had never asked what she actually did, because he had never believed the answer mattered. Michael concluded the recognition. The investigation also confirms that Miss Carter consistently recused herself from funding decisions involving Brooks Urban Development whenever policy required. He looked toward Emily. Thank you for maintaining the integrity of the process. Emily simply nodded. Thank you. Then she quietly sat down. No smile of victory. No satisfaction, only professionalism. The hearing continued. Financial penalties were outlined. Enhanced compliance requirements were imposed. Several administrative violations required corrective action. Nathan's company would be permitted to continue existing, but only under strict external oversight. Future grants would require independent financial supervision. Several reporting obligations would remain in place for years. Nathan accepted every decision without interruption. He no longer searched for excuses. He understood that arguing against verified records served no purpose. Outside the hearing room, reporters immediately surrounded participants as they exited. Questions came rapidly. Mr. Brooks, did you know your wife supervised grant compliance? Nathan stopped walking. No. When did you find out? Recently. Do you have any response to today's findings? Nathan looked briefly toward the cameras. I accept the process. Nothing more. He continued toward his car. Meanwhile, reporters approached Emily. She stopped politely. Miss Carter, how does it feel knowing you protected the project your husband managed? Emily answered after a brief pause. The project belongs to the community. Another reporter asked, were you seeking justice against your husband? Emily gently shook her head. I was fulfilling my professional responsibility. Did today's outcome satisfy you? She looked toward the foundation building before answering. I hoped the evidence would be complete. And personally, Emily smiled faintly. I prefer not to discuss my personal life. She thanked the reporters and walked away. Her answers appeared on every evening news broadcast, not because they were dramatic, because they were remarkably restrained. That evening, television programs replayed footage from the original launch ceremony. Nathan confidently standing on stage, Emily quietly being escorted away. Then they showed today's hearing. Emily seated among senior foundation officials, professional, composed, respected. Commentators noticed the contrast immediately. One legal analyst observed, "What's striking isn't that she participated in the investigation." He paused. "It's that she constantly removed herself from decisions whenever policy required." That's exactly what ethical governance looks like. Another financial expert added, "The documentation protected everyone, including the foundation itself." Across Seattle, neighbors who had barely noticed Emily before began recognizing her face. Not because she had sought attention, because integrity had quietly become visible. Nathan returned home after sunset. The house felt unusually still. He walked into the living room where Emily was organizing several books. She looked up. "You're home." "I am." Neither mentioned the hearing immediately. Finally, Nathan spoke. "I watched what happened." Emily waited. "They thanked you." She nodded slightly. "It wasn't about me." Nathan's voice became almost unrecognizable. "I spent years believing I was the reason that project existed." Emily answered honestly, "The community deserved the project." He looked at her. "And I thought I earned everything alone." Emily remained silent, because there was nothing truthful she could add. Nathan slowly sat down. "I never even knew who you really were." Emily looked at him with quiet kindness. "You never asked." The sentence wasn't cruel. It wasn't meant to punish. It was simply true. And sometimes truth carried more weight than anger ever could. The narrator already knew that Nathan's greatest loss had never been funding reputation or public admiration. It was realizing that the extraordinary woman he had once dismissed because of her appearance had quietly lived beside him for years, carrying responsibility, integrity, and wisdom he had never cared enough to discover. By the time he finally saw her clearly, the law had already completed its work. Only life remained. And life offered no procedure for recovering years spent failing to truly know the person waiting beside you. Autumn arrived quietly in Seattle. The construction cranes still rose above the skyline. Families continued moving into newly completed affordable housing units. Children rode bicycles through neighborhoods that had existed only as architectural renderings a year earlier. The project survived. Not because any one individual had saved it, because institutions had insisted that public good should never depend upon private pride. The narrator already knew that genuine justice rarely destroyed everything. Its purpose was to preserve what deserved saving, while holding people accountable for what they had done. Nearly 6 months had passed since the regulatory hearing. Brooks Urban Development remained in business, but under conditions unlike anything Nathan Brooks had imagined during the height of his success. Every major financial decision now required independent review. Quarterly compliance reports were submitted to external auditors. Large expenditures demanded multiple documented approvals. Internal accounting procedures had been rewritten from the ground up. The company no longer operated on assumptions. It operated on documentation. Nathan signed every report himself. He read every page, sometimes twice. The habit came too late to erase past mistakes. It became part of the person he was slowly learning to become. On a quiet Tuesday morning, employees gathered inside the main conference room for the first annual compliance briefing under the new oversight program. Richard Lawson stood beside a projection screen. External auditors occupied the front row. Department managers filled the remaining seats. Nathan walked to the podium without the confidence that had once characterized every speech. Instead, he carried a folder containing prepared remarks. He looked around the room before speaking. A year ago, I believed leadership meant moving quickly. He paused. I've learned that leadership also means slowing down long enough to verify every decision. The room remained silent. No one applauded. None was expected. Nathan continued. We failed to meet important administrative standards. He did not blame Vanessa. He did not blame Richard. He did not blame the foundation. The responsibility ultimately belonged to me. Several longtime employees exchanged brief glances. Many had never heard Nathan publicly accept responsibility before. He concluded simply, from today forward, every signature in this company will represent careful review, not assumption. The meeting ended quietly. No celebration followed, only work. Across the city, Emily Carter visited one of the completed housing developments funded by the foundation. Children laughed on a newly built playground. Young parents unloaded groceries from their cars. An elderly couple sat together beneath maple trees whose leaves had begun turning brilliant shades of red and gold. Emily preferred visiting completed projects without media announcements, without photographers, without speeches. A local site coordinator approached her. Miss Carter. Emily smiled. Good morning. We wanted to thank the foundation. You don't need to thank us. The coordinator looked toward the families nearby. These homes changed people's lives. Emily watched a little girl helping her younger brother carry a soccer ball across the courtyard. The community changed its own life. She believed that. The foundation merely helped create the opportunity. Later that afternoon, Margaret Ellis joined Emily for a routine site inspection. They walked slowly along newly completed sidewalks. You know, Margaret said, people still ask why you never spoke publicly after the hearing. Emily looked toward the apartment buildings. There wasn't much to say. You could have defended yourself. Emily smiled softly. The records already did. Margaret laughed quietly. That sounds exactly like you. It sounds like the process. Margaret stopped walking for a moment. I submitted your name for the National Ethical Leadership Award. Emily looked genuinely surprised. You shouldn't have. I already did. I don't need recognition. Margaret answered warmly. Sometimes recognition isn't about what we need. Emily didn't respond. She simply continued walking. Recognition had never motivated her. Responsibility always had. Meanwhile, Vanessa Collins sat inside a much smaller office than the one she once occupied. After the regulatory review, she had resigned from Brooks Urban Development. No formal accusation had been made that she intentionally violated regulations. However, the investigation concluded that she had accepted administrative responsibilities outside her expertise without ensuring proper compliance. That failure had carried consequences. She now worked for a modest nonprofit arts organization. The salary was lower, the office simpler, the prestige almost non-existent. Yet something had changed. She checked every document carefully. She questioned procedures she once ignored. She refused to approve anything she didn't fully understand. One afternoon, a young co-worker asked, "Why are you so careful about paperwork?" Vanessa looked at the stack of documents on her desk. Because shortcuts are never really shortcuts. The younger woman smiled. That sounds like experience talking. Vanessa nodded quietly. It is. Across town, Nathan met with attorney Susan Mitchell to finalize another matter that had been waiting for months. His divorce. The paperwork rested neatly between them. Susan reviewed the final settlement. Everything has been agreed upon. Nathan looked down at the documents. Emily had requested remarkably little. She sought no punitive financial award, no public statement, no attempt to embarrass him, only an equitable division consistent with state law. Nothing more. Susan closed the file. Your wife could have made this much more difficult. Nathan answered softly. I know. She didn't. I know. He signed the papers. Each signature felt heavier than the last, not because of the property being divided, because each page marked the legal ending of a marriage he had failed long before the investigation began. Several days later, Emily and Nathan met one final time at their attorney's office. The atmosphere remained calm, professional, respectful. After the last document had been signed, their attorneys quietly stepped outside to allow them a few private moments. Neither spoke immediately. Nathan finally broke the silence. I've rehearsed 100 apologies. Emily listened. None of them seem enough. She looked at him gently. They probably aren't. Nathan nodded. I understand. He hesitated. I judged you by how other people saw you. Emily answered honestly. Yes. I stopped asking about your life. Yes? I cared more about admiration than loyalty. Emily remained silent. Nathan continued. I don't expect forgiveness. Emily folded her hands calmly. Forgiveness isn't the same as rebuilding trust. He lowered his eyes. I know. For several long moments, neither spoke. Finally, Emily stood. I hope your company succeeds. Nathan looked surprised. After everything, she nodded. Families still need those homes. The answer stunned him. Even now, even after the humiliation, the dismissal, the investigation, the divorce. Emily's concern remained focused upon people who would never know her name, not upon revenge. Nathan stood slowly. I wish I had understood you years ago. Emily smiled sadly. So do I. She picked up her folder. At the door, Nathan spoke once more. Will I ever see you again? Emily considered the question carefully. Our paths may cross. She paused. But they'll be different paths. Then she quietly left. Nathan remained standing in the empty conference room long after the door closed. There was no dramatic collapse, no desperate attempt to stop her. Only silence. The kind that arrives when every excuse has already disappeared. Months later, the foundation officially transferred long-term supervision of the housing project to a newly established community trust. Independent oversight ensured continued transparency. Financial safeguards became permanent. Families continued receiving affordable housing. The project no longer depended upon one company or one executive. It belonged to the community it served. Emily attended the final transition ceremony. She stood near the back. No speech, no recognition, no cameras followed her. She watched local residents cut a simple ribbon before children ran laughing through the courtyard. Then she quietly walked away, before most guests even realized she'd been there. The narrator already knew why. Emily had never wanted history to remember her as the woman who exposed her husband. She hoped to be remembered, if at all, as someone who protected something larger than herself. A community. A promise. And the quiet belief that dignity never required applause. Winter returned to Seattle with gentle rain instead of heavy snow. The city looked much the same as it had a year earlier. Construction cranes still stretched above the skyline. Morning commuters still hurried through crowded streets. Coffee shops still filled before sunrise. Life rarely paused long enough to acknowledge how completely it had changed. The narrator already knew that the most meaningful victories seldom announce themselves. They appeared quietly in ordinary mornings long after public attention had moved elsewhere. Nearly 1 year had passed since Nathan Brooks had stood beneath brilliant stage lights and asked security to remove his overweight wife from the ceremony celebrating his greatest achievement. The newspapers no longer discussed the investigation. Television stations had moved on to newer stories. Business magazines now featured different entrepreneurs. Public memory had shortened. Private lessons remained. Nathan arrived at Brooks Urban Development before anyone else, as he had done almost every morning since the regulatory review concluded. His office looked different now. Several framed magazine covers had disappeared. Awards once displayed prominently along one wall had been moved into storage. In their place stood shelves containing policy manuals, compliance guides, and financial regulations. Visitors occasionally joked that his office resembled a law library. Nathan never laughed. Every binder represented a lesson learned too late. He sat behind his desk, reviewing the quarterly compliance report personally. Each page carried handwritten notes, questions, corrections, requests for clarification. Richard Lawson entered carrying another folder. Everything's ready for submission. Nathan accepted the documents. Did legal review every attachment? Yes. Independent audit. Completed yesterday. Nathan nodded. Good. Richard hesitated before speaking again. You've changed. Nathan smiled faintly. I had to. No. Richard looked around the office. You chose to. Nathan considered those words. Perhaps both were true. The company had survived. Not because people forgot what happened, because it rebuilt itself through accountability rather than public relations. Employees noticed the difference. No invoice moved forward without verification. No budget changed without documentation. Questions were encouraged instead of dismissed. The culture Nathan once believed slowed progress had ultimately strengthened the business. Across the city, Emily Carter unlocked the door to her modest office inside the foundation. Morning sunlight reflected softly through the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Her routine remained almost identical to the one she had followed for years. Fresh coffee, organized calendar, review of overnight correspondence. Nothing about her work suggested she had become quietly respected throughout nonprofit compliance circles across the country. She still answered her own phone, still organized her own notes, still carried the same leather notebook that had accompanied her through every stage of the investigation. Daniel knocked gently. I have something for you. Emily looked up. What is it? He handed her a sealed envelope. The National Council sent their decision. Emily sighed softly. I told Margaret she shouldn't nominate me. Daniel smiled. She ignored you. Emily opened the envelope. Inside rested a formal letter. The National Council for Ethical Grant Administration had unanimously selected her to receive its annual Distinguished Public Stewardship Award. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., travel expenses included. Emily folded the letter carefully. I'm honored. Daniel waited. Will you go? Emily thought for a moment. If attending helps people understand why good procedures matter. She smiled gently. Then yes. Several weeks later, the ceremony took place inside a modest conference center rather than a glamorous ballroom. No television cameras crowded the entrance. No celebrities appeared. The audience consisted largely of auditors, nonprofit executives, compliance officers, and public administrators. People whose careers depended upon invisible work. Emily accepted the award without dramatic emotion. During her brief remarks, she spoke for less than 4 minutes. I've often been asked how to protect public trust. She looked across the audience. I don't believe trust begins with extraordinary people. A short pause. I believe it begins with ordinary people who choose to document ordinary decisions honestly. Many in the audience quietly nodded. She continued, when procedures seem slow, remember that fairness often requires patience. Another pause. And when no one notices careful work, a faint smile crossed her face. It still matters. The room responded with respectful applause. Not loud, not theatrical, simply sincere. Back in Seattle, Nathan watched a recording of the ceremony late that evening. He paused the video several times, not because Emily had criticized him. She never mentioned him. Not because she celebrated the investigation. She didn't. She spoke only about responsibility, about process, about integrity. Those had always been the qualities he overlooked because they never demanded attention. He quietly closed the laptop. Some lessons arrived only after losing the person who had tried to live them beside you every day. Months later, Brooks Urban Development completed another affordable housing community. The ribbon-cutting ceremony looked noticeably different from the one held the previous year. There were fewer promotional banners, fewer photographers, more local residents. Community leaders spoke briefly before inviting families to tour their new homes. Nathan declined the opportunity to deliver the closing remarks. Instead, he asked the project manager to introduce the neighborhood volunteers who had spent months helping future residents prepare their new community. After the ceremony ended, one young employee approached him. "Why didn't you give the final speech?" Nathan looked toward children playing near the newly opened playground. The buildings matter more than the person standing at the microphone. The employee smiled. "I like that." Nathan answered quietly, "I had to learn it." One rainy afternoon, almost 18 months after their divorce became final, Nathan visited the original housing development funded through the foundation's grant. He came alone. No reporters, no staff, no photographers. Children played basketball near the community center. An elderly man watered flowers outside his apartment. Young parents pushed strollers along clean sidewalks. No one recognized Nathan. He sat on a bench watching the neighborhood continue its ordinary life. A maintenance worker eventually sat beside him. "Beautiful place." Nathan nodded. "It is. My granddaughter lives here." Nathan smiled. "That's wonderful. We never could have afforded a safe apartment before." The older man looked around proudly. This place changed everything. Nathan listened quietly. For the first time, he saw the project exactly as Emily always had. Not as a monument to professional success. As a promise kept to strangers. That perspective arrived painfully late. Yet it arrived. Across town, Emily finished another ordinary workday. She locked her office, placed her notebook inside her bag, walked toward the parking garage beneath another soft Seattle rain. Her phone buzzed. A message from Hannah. "Dinner Sunday." Emily smiled. "Absolutely." She slipped the phone back into her pocket. There were no dramatic endings waiting for her. No hidden fortune to reveal. No public celebration. Only family. Meaningful work, quiet evenings, peace. As she reached her car, she looked briefly toward the skyline. Somewhere beyond those buildings stood neighborhoods where hundreds of families now lived safely. Children would grow up there. Parents would build futures there. Most would never know her name. That had never mattered. The narrator understood the final truth long before anyone else. Nathan Brooks believed success meant being seen. Emily Carter understood that real significance often belonged to those willing to do the right thing without anyone watching. One pursued admiration, the other protected trust. When their lives finally separated, each carried something very different into the future. Nathan carried regret shaped into wisdom. Emily carried dignity that had never depended upon another person's approval. The law had completed its work. The records had been preserved. Justice had followed its proper course. But the quietest ending belonged not to courtrooms, investigations, or public hearings. It belonged to a woman who refused to answer humiliation with humiliation, who allowed evidence to speak louder than anger, who walked away without demanding applause, because she understood something many people spend entire lifetimes trying to learn. Respect earned through character never disappears when appearances change. And truth, however patiently it waits, eventually finds its own voice. In every life, there are moments when we discover that strength doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with dramatic speeches or public victories. It appears in quiet decisions made when no one is watching, in careful honesty when shortcuts seem easier, and in the courage to let truth stand on its own without forcing it forward. Emily's journey was never about defeating another person. It was about remaining faithful to her principles when doing so carried a personal cost. Nathan's journey reminds us that success built only on appearances is fragile, while success grounded in integrity can withstand even the hardest examination. The people who benefited most from this story were not those sitting in boardrooms or standing before cameras, but the families who found safe homes because accountability protected a project that truly mattered. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to know your thoughts. Tell us where you're watching from and what part of Emily's journey resonated with you the most. If you enjoy thoughtful stories about quiet courage, legal justice, and people who choose dignity over revenge, you can leave a like and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for spending your time with us. And until our next story, take good care of yourself and those who place their trust in you.